Following the horrific anti-Semitic massacre at Bondi Beach in Australia last Sunday, police in Britain have today announced further clampdowns on pro-Palestine protests across the country. So in the wake of that violence, police in Manchester and London have said that protesters chanting "Globalise the Intifada" will now face arrest. Metropolitan Police Commissioner Mark Rowley and Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police Stephen Watson said this. They released a joint statement. "We know communities are concerned about placards and chants such as "Globalise the Intifada," and those using it at future protest or in a targeted way should expect the Met and GMP, Greater Manchester Police, to take action. Violent acts have taken place. The context has changed. Words have meaning and consequence. We will act decisively and make arrests." Police say that frontline officers will use powers under the Public Order Act to make those arrests, though they also say that current laws are inadequate. And the Community Security Trust, which is a Jewish security organisation, responded to the police statement with this. So they said the recent terror attack in Bondi and Heaton Park were abhorrent, leaving Jewish communities feeling frightened and vulnerable. These attacks come amid a deeply concerning rise in anti-Semitism, which has created fear and uncertainty for Jewish people across the country. For many years, CST has called for tougher action against hateful and violent chants and placards at protests, and this announcement comes not a moment too soon, in particular given the wave of terrorism against Jews around the world. It is intolerable that a call for a global intifada should be allowed on our streets. We welcome the news that this behaviour will now be met with arrests. This is a necessary and important first step to turn back this tide of violent incitement, and we hope that police across the country and the CPS will follow suit. Ash, your thoughts?
I mean, the first thing is that I can't think of anything worse for the rising prevalence of anti-Semitism than to try and create a connection between the safety of Jewish communities and Jewish people in the diaspora to what you can or can't say that's critical of Israel or supportive of the Palestinian cause. Because I think that's one of the worst things you can do for community relations, because it creates what I think is a false zero-sum game, where it says in order to protect this minority group, the thing you have to do is curtail, majority or civil liberties at large, right? I just think that's absolutely a recipe for anti-Semitic resentment and anti-Semitic speech acts and behaviours. And I can't think of anything more counterproductive. But I do think that this has been a key tool in the arsenal of Israel's advocates and the Israel lobby around the world, which is they're not saying, okay, if you clamp down on this speech, it's going to make Jewish people feel safer. Far from it. One of the things that it does is that it sort of raises the temperature in the diaspora, which strengthens Israel's, purported justification for its existence, which is you're never going to feel safe or integrated or welcome in any of the other places in which you may live. It can only be here. So I think that kind of counterproductiveness is absolutely intentional. Second point, which is about the term intifada itself. What does intifada mean? Is it always a call for violence? Is it not? Our idea of what intifada means as non-Arabic speakers is obviously highly reductive. And in terms of how we understand it in the news cycle, it tends to be based on, quite an ahistorical understanding. So the idea that intifada can only mean violence and it can only mean attacks on Jewish people. One is that that's a sort of perception shaped through repetition, right? The same way from the river to the sea, well, that's anti-Semitic. There's very poor evidence for it. It's just something which is said over and over again. Similar things gone on with Intifada. It's also, of course, shaped by the Second Intifada. Second Intifada is, defined in many ways by the use of suicide bombings as a tactic by Hamas and other militant groups. But the first Intifada, which took place in the 1980s, employed a very different set of tactics, and its disintegration into violence really comes after the sort of layer of intellectuals and activists and leaders in Palestinian civil society were all arrested. And so I just want to read something very quickly about the first Intifada. Jimmy Carter, former United States president, wrote that the Palestinians' non-violent resistance in the First Intifada contested military occupation from a store of classic methods used on every continent in today's world, as people fight for human rights and justice with concern for the connection between the ends and means. He added that the use of concerted non-violent action offers a basis for transformation of conflict to peace building. So this narrative that pro-Israel advocates, Mark Rowley amongst others, that they're trying to push of like Intifada only means violence. Tell that to Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, although when was he saying that?
So this was, I don't know when exactly it was written, but the thing I'm saying is this, which is the word intifada is like uprising. It would be like saying you have to criminalize the use of the word uprising because an uprising can only be violent. Whereas, of course, you can point to different instances in history where you go, no.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think arresting people for it is ridiculous. Like, it's clearly not incitement. But I wouldn't sort of shout globalise the Intifada, because I do think that obviously people listening to it will associate it with the second Intifada, which did involve suicide bombings. And then if you're saying globalise that, I can see how the associations are drawn. I think it's very different from the river to the sea, which always gets brought into this, which I think is very clearly, like when people say, oh, that's a chant for the genocide of Jews. That's just nonsense. That's completely ridiculous. Globalise the Intifada, I think I can see why that does make people feel uncomfortable, even if I absolutely think it should not be banned.
But the thing is that I think that there is a point to be made here, which is that unless you are that person doing the chant, or you're that person who's leading the chant, when there is such a rich and varied history of the word being used, like you can't, I think, definitively say what intent is. You might be able to say, well, this is the effect of it. But I don't think you can police intent in that way and say, well, the reason why you're using it is because of its associations with the Second Intifada. The second thing, and I think that this is sort of about the like increasingly draconian use of curtailments on free speech to deal with political problems, is that the Palestinians have enshrined in international law the right to armed resistance against their occupiers, right? They've got the same right as any other people does for that armed resistance. I don't think that were I to lead that as a chant, one, it's not very catchy, but if I did, I imagine that there would be demands for my arrest on the grounds that it makes people feel uncomfortable. But it is a fact, right? It is a fact that Palestinians have that right. And so I think you have like this quite strange political problem, which is obviously, if you're chant about the Palestinians' right to armed struggle, make lots of people feel very uncomfortable, it is also a fact in international law. And I just think that to get through that issue, which is it's fact in international law, but yes, I can see how it could make people feel uncomfortable here in England, is to go, all right, well, we're going to ban the use of this phrasing. Again, I can't see any better recipe for radicalization.
In other news involving pro-Palestine protesters, a hunger striker remanded for alleged involvement in a Palestine action has been hospitalized today. 20-year-old Kasa Zura's condition deteriorated significantly on her 46th day of hunger strike, meaning she required urgent medical assistance. But it took prison authorities at HMP Bronzefield nearly 24 hours to authorise her transfer. That was even as relatives and politicians raised the alarm outside. Late on Tuesday afternoon, Zura's health began to fail, with the hunger striker complaining of severe pain in her chest, lower back and around her kidneys. That's according to loved ones. Supporters also told Novara media that her blood pressure had dropped significantly, while her heart rate was very high. Yet the prison allegedly refused to call an ambulance despite repeated requests from doctors and supporters outside. According to some at the scene, an ambulance did arrive at the prison around 9 p.m, only to be turned away. Staying at the prison through the night, supporters and medical professionals continued to call on the prison authorities to allow Zura access to medical care, with some phoning the local ambulance services themselves. According to dispatches, though, only ambulances called by the prison according to dispatchers, only ambulances called by the prison would gain entry. At around 1:30 this morning, your party MP, Zara Sultana, joined family members outside the prison and tried to speak to prison staff.
Hello?
Hiya, my name's Zara Sultana. I'm a Member of Parliament. I've been contacting the ambulance service all evening because Kesa Zahra needs urgent medical care, and I've been told that it is the prison that have denied an ambulance transfer for her to go to hospital. Hello?
Hiya.
Hello, did you just hear what I said?
Yes.
Can I ask that the prison immediately allow an ambulance to transfer Kesa, who's on the 46th day of her hunger strike? Hel-
I will consult with my medical team.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I understand that the medical team have given her an ECG and said that everything is fine. She requires urgent hospital attention. And I'm going to be just sitting outside until an ambulance is allowed in to transfer her to hospital. So I've just been cut off.
Sultana pledged to stay at the prison until Zura received proper medical attention. But despite Zura having been hospitalised just last Friday as well, no ambulance was called. An HMP Bronzeville spokesperson said they could not comment on individual cases, but gave this statement to Middle East Eye. We can confirm that all prisoners have full access to healthcare, including attendance at external medical facilities if needed. Any prisoner refusing food receives regular medical assessment and support from clinicians, as well as being offered mental health support. Fellow remand prisoner Amu Gib, who is also on the 46th day of a hunger strike, told Novara Media via an intermediary that their experience had been quite different to that, saying this. Recent experiences show that even though the healthcare team advises she be admitted to hospital, and even though she's been on 46 days of a hunger strike and she's at a critical risk point, the healthcare staff at hospital defer to prison officers who have no medical training at all. Suddenly they're responsible for her life. And based on their behaviour so far, I have no reason to believe they'll actually recommend the best treatment possible. They just want us all to be in prison. Prime Minister's question, Sultana's your party co-founder, Jeremy Corbyn, raised the issue of the hunger strikers with the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of State for Justice declined a meeting with the representatives of a number of hunger strikers in prison at the present time. These are all remand prisoners. They're not convicted of anything. Since then, a further prisoner, Kazam, has been taken to hospital, as have others. Many people are very concerned about the regular breaches of prison conditions and prison rules in respect to these hunger strikers. Will he make arrangements for the Ministry of Justice to meet representatives of the hunger strikers to discuss these breaches of the conditions that they're experiencing at the present time?
Prime Minister.
Well, he will appreciate there are rules and procedures in place in relation to hunger strikes, and we're following those rules and procedures.
That intervention from Corbyn was better received than a similar one he made on Tuesday.
There are deep concerns expressed by them, their families and their legal representatives about access to medical treatment and the way they've been treated when taken to hospital as well. To help the situation, would the Minister be able to meet their legal representatives and families if necessary in order to discuss this situation and try and move forward to help the safety of these particular prisoners?
Minister.
No.
It's pretty gross. Especially given that now, well, they'd already gone to hospital by the time he said that. No, not interested. Finally, after 18 hours of delay, HMP Bronzefield relented. So just after 1 p.m. today, an ambulance finally arrived for Zura, who has now been taken to hospital to receive medical attention. Shortly afterwards, demonstrators formed a blockade of police vans after a doctor who'd been amongst Zura's supporters was detained by police while another medic was allegedly shoved to the ground. In a statement to Middle East Eye, before the deterioration in her health, Zura said this: I lie down with my hand on my heart every night, making sure that my heart is beating normally and that I'm breathing. All of this is just because of a lack of food in my body, but mentally I have no desire for food. I have no desire to eat. I have no desire to end the hunger strike. The only thing that I desire is victory in this and freedom. Kessa Zara and Amu Gib are among the 8 prisoners affiliated with the prescribed group Palestine Action, or I suppose allegedly affiliated, who are currently on hunger strike. All have been on remand without trial for many months, some over a year. Many will spend as much as 2 years in jail before facing a jury. None face terror charges for their alleged involvement in actions at an Elbit weapons factory in Bristol last year, or an action at RAF Bryce Norton this year, during which 2 refueler planes were sprayed with red paint. They are refusing food in protest at the prescription of the group, as well as the deterioration of their conditions following the ban this summer. remand prisoners are supposed to be detained in freer conditions than people with convictions, including being allowed to wear ordinary clothes, unlimited visits within reason, and access to personal items. Instead, the hunger striking prisoners allege that prison officials have restricted their communications with the outside world, removed them from work and education opportunities, and taken away their personal belongings. Important to note, because whenever this is brought up on Twitter, everyone says, why are you expressing any sympathy for the hunger strikers? And then they point to the fact that someone on one of those Palestine actions is accused of hitting a policewoman with a hammer. None of the hunger strikers are being charged with violence against persons, which is important, I think, to clarify. Ash, this is really serious, isn't it? Because it's day 46 for two of them. So the hunger strike that will be in most of our viewers, well, whether or not you were alive then, but in their minds, is 1981 with Bobby Sands and other activists with the IRA. They were on hunger strike because they wanted to have the status of political prisoners and various other demands. The first of their number died after 46 days.
Yeah, Martin Herson.
Which is the day they're on now. Bobby Sands, 66 days. So we are in the absolute danger zone, aren't we?
I think one of the things to remember about hunger strikes is that it's fairly unique amongst tactics for the kind of strength of feeling, and I suppose legitimacy that they build after someone has died. And this was the case with the 1981 strikers. Now, obviously, the 1981 hunger strikers of the Maze prison, they undertook that strike at a time of, a struggle of national liberation in which, there was embedded community support. I don't think you can compare Palestine action to that kind of context, much less embedded in the community. The numbers are far fewer. But when you go back and you look at 1981, that movement from contempt, disdain, treating these prisoners as though they were, disgusting or play acting, absolute contempt by politicians and the media. After the death of Martin Herson, but particularly Bobby Sands, because at that time he was lawfully a member of parliament, it really came back to haunt the British state significantly. And there are some parts of the world, and I'm not just talking about on the island of Ireland, but internationally, where the reputation of the British state has never recovered since the death of Bobby Sands. And I think that that's one of the things that people fail to understand about the Palestine Action hunger strikers, which is, you've got MPs laughing when Jeremy Corbyn is demanding a meeting with the Justice Secretary. You've got people on Twitter accusing these individuals of basically LARPing, right? They're play acting at something that they don't understand. What they don't understand is that this exact contempt will indelibly stain the reputations of all involved if it is the case that somebody dies on this hunger strike. There is something very almost like retrospective about hunger strikes, which is when they're happening, a lot of contempt, a lot of dismissal after someone's died, because that is such a powerful demonstration of their seriousness and their commitment. The narrative does change.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is like the dismissal of Palestine protesters. Like when you look at the, even, I mean, I don't want to say, it's not that complicated. Israel are doing, have done, continuing a genocidal war against a pretty defenseless people. Like it's sickening. But the stakes is like the combination of how high the stakes obviously are and how quick so many people are to dismiss these as sort of like attention-seeking children. It's like trying to stop a genocide is good. Like that's a good thing to do. And I do find it like, I suppose I understand people disagreeing with the methods, which I don't, by the way, but I understand people disagreeing more than I understand people just saying like, oh, isn't this ridiculous? It's like, these are clearly people with a very legitimate cause that they feel very strongly about which the stakes are huge.
Because I think when you live in such morally degraded times, one of the features of it is that you make having a moral compass a mark of, embarrassment somehow. It's almost like a faux pas. Why are you trying to make me feel guilty? And I think that that's why when you look at sort of, professional, like, poo-pooers and buffoons from, Jeremy Clarkson or Piers Morgan, the things that they always accuse people of is hypocrisy. It's always, well, you don't really mean your principles. And what that's trying to do is sort of say, anytime you take a moral stance, haha, I'm going to come here and I'm going to undercut you. And I think that that's sort of, you've always had activists being disparaged in this way. That's a feature of 68, it's a feature of the 80s and the dismissal of the loony left. But I think it's particularly a feature of the sort of post-neoliberal era where the idea of belonging to a greater cause than just looking after yourself is seen as somehow gross or disgusting. Now, I don't think that anyone looks at the times we live in now and think, oh, people have got more moral integrity than they used to. I think that people agree that actually moral leadership is a really important quality that we've been missing. And I think that's something which is embodied by these activists in spades. I mean, one thing that I will say about the way in which the story is broken through in the media is that when the hunger strike was first announced, I was kind of worried that we'd be one of the few outlets covering it. And the reason why is because Palestine Action prisoners have been so disparaged and they've been so invisibilized from the wider world, especially this matter of being held on remand for far longer than you're supposed to hold anyone on remand. This is now the second story in the Times today. They've significantly broken through.